Have you ever wondered why people suddenly start buying more iPhones when the prices drop, and right the next year, when there's a new iPhone launched by Apple, the prices are crazy expensive, but the people still go on to buy it? Why? This behavior in economics is called demand. Hi friends, welcome to Econverse. I'm Abrar and I am a student and I'm a fellow student who topped in economics for GCSEs last year. In this channel, we make learning economics simpler, clearer and hopefully a lot more fun. In this video, we're going to be looking at the fundamental concept of demand.
All right, everybody. So, demand. So, when we look at demand, I think we'd like to break it down into a few major chunks. So, to begin with, let's start thinking about what is demand. So, what is demand? So, this is really important. So, you have to understand the definition of demand. Demand refers to the willingness and ability of consumers to buy a product. Now, what is the difference between willingness and ability? Willingness refers to one's desire to buy a product, one's want to buy something. And ability refers to his ability in terms of income to buy the product, whether he can actually buy the product. The next most important thing to look at for demand is the demand curve. Now, essentially, in economics, there are some really important diagrams, and let me tell you, demand is that one diagram that's going to stick with you for life. It is one of the most fundamental diagrams in economics. So, essentially, you have an x axis where you measure the quantity of goods and services, and you have the y axis when you're measuring the prices. And a demand curve is a downward sloping curve. So that is demand and you label it with a D. Now, why is it downward sloping? This is extremely important. This relationship between demand and price is something you can say that is inverse. So the higher the price, the lower the quantity. Now let's look at something. So this is price 1, this is quantity 1, and this is quantity, and this is price. So at this price, let me at this price, you're able to get this level of quantity. But as soon as the price rises, the quantity decreases. And let's assume now that the price decreases, quantity increases. This shows that there is an inverse relationship. You got to remember the word inverse relationship. That means when one increases, the other decreases. So in our case, if price increases, demand decreases. And this inverse relationship is stated by something you call the law of demand. Now this is really important for exams, and I would like that you sort of memorize this however you can, using flashcards perhaps. Now the law of demand states that a rise in the price level leads to a fall in the quantity of goods demanded, and vice versa. That is the law of demand. But there is one key caveat to this, and that is ceteris paribus. Now, before you think I'm yapping, ceteris paribus is a word that means all other things constant. So, all other factors remaining constant. What does that mean? So essentially, when the price of a product increases, the quantity demanded of it decreases, bearing in mind that all other factors in the market are constant. So, demand is depicted using this diagram, which you will need to remember. So it's essentially like a really simple diagram. It's just a downward sloping curve because demand and prices are inversely related as per the law of demand. Now, let's look at another interesting thing. So when you take a demand curve, for example, let's take this as our demand curve. This is our demand. Now, I want you to tell me if we have a point here on the demand curve and a point here, what exactly is happening? There is this price and there's this quantity. Let's name that P and let's name that Q. And let's name this one as P1 and Q1. So, what exactly just happened? Why did the demand curve move from this point to this point? What changed? It's simple. The price changes. So essentially, in economics, in the demand curve or in the supply curve, which we'll cover in the next video, whenever there is a movement, the change is caused by price. Now, this triangle that I've put there is something called delta in maths, and that refers to change. So, any movement in a demand curve is caused by changes in price. Now, let's look at another thing, and that is something we call shifts. Now, let's assume this is one of your demand curves, and let's assume the economy is somewhat doing well, and now your demand curve moves there. Now, what has happened? How did that happen? This is caused by non price factors. So, essentially, if I were to show it to you, let's assume this is your price level. You can keep the price level the same, but the level of quantity demanded in the economy has increased. Why? It has increased because of non price factors. Now, there are several non price factors, and you know this, you'll need to know this. So, these are your factors that cause a shift in the demand curve. Now, as someone who loves maths and economics, I like to try and bring them together, and I think I'll provide you with a formula with which you can memorize these factors easily. So essentially, the quantity demanded of, let's assume, X. So in this case, X is our product, are affected by these factors. Firstly, you have your price of X. Now you label this with an arrow beneath to show that it is constant. Okay, assuming that it is constant, we look at the other factors, which are non-price factors that can cause shifts. So I like to think of this as price of related goods, which I like to put with R. Now there are two types of related goods. There are substitute goods and there are complementary goods. Now what does it mean? So essentially, substitute goods, for example, is something like Pepsi and Coke. So they replace each other technically. So if you buy a can of Pepsi, chances are that you're avoiding the Coke and you're buying the Pepsi. These both are rivals. So when the demand for your rival increases, the demand for your product decreases, and vice versa. Okay? On the other hand, what is a complementary good? Now, a complementary good is basically when both of them complement each other. So, when the demand for one increases, the demand for the other also increases. So, for example, among students, it is common that when you get your iPad, chances are you also get an Apple Pencil or any pencil for that matter that works on the iPad. So these are complements, especially in the cases of students. So when the demand for the iPad from students increases, chances are that the demand for the Apple Pencil also increases in the students. So they go together. Now, the next part of the formula is something important and something that is related to population. So I name this POP. So when the population of a country increases, the chances are that the demand is going to increase because now you have a wider base of customers that can buy the product. The next factor is tastes and preferences. Now, tastes and preferences is extremely prevalent in today's culture, in the modern world, with social media and everything going on. People's perception of something can quickly change, and this can drive demand. Now, we've seen this in the cases of the Stanley water bottles, I believe, which is a good example. And then the last non price factor that affects demand is labeled Y. Now, I want you to remember this label. So, this is commonly used in all of economics to label income. So, when the income of a person increases, his ability to buy goods and services increases. So now let's link it back to the definition. So income can affect the ability to buy a product. Taste and preferences affect the willingness to buy the product. Population size also affects the ability to buy the product. The price of related goods affects the willingness to buy the products. So essentially what I did was whenever I had a question in relation to the factors affecting them, the first thing that I'd remember was the formula.
If you thought this video helped you understand economics better, make sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to join the Econverse. I'll see you in the next video where we explore the other side of the spectrum. Yup, you guessed it right, it is supply.